Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fact Check Simplified. Today, we're talking about that time when the internet's most respected storytellers news organizations started acting like petty nightclub bouncers for their own websites. Think of it as the world's worst startup pitch meeting gone global, where the big idea was to build a beautiful, informative library and then electrify all the bookshelves to stop people from taking notes. We're diving deep into the bizarre, self-sabotaging world of news sites that block you from copying a single sentence, then immediately turn around with giant, blinking buttons begging you to share their article on social media. It's a masterclass in corporate schizophrenia, and yes, we are about to wildly oversimplify a decade-long economic and technological meltdown into one fast-paced, highly caffeinated rant. You're welcome, but before the inevitable corporate betrayal starts, if you enjoy this highly dramatic but fun version of modern facts, please hit that like and subscribe button. Seriously, it helps us pay the electric bill for our overpriced standing desks. All right, grab an iced latte. Things are about to get unnecessarily infuriating. Let's rewind the clock. Back to a time of digital innocence, a mythical epic of dial-up modems screeching the song of their people in web pages that looked like hostage notes made from 13 different fonts. This was the primordial soup of the modern internet, the late 90s and early 2000s, where the defining ethos was a beautiful, chaotic, and catastrophically unprofitable idea. Information wants to be free. It was a rallying cry, a philosophical statement, and a hacker's mantra all rolled into one, and for a glorious, fleeting moment, it felt true. Universities, libraries, hobbyists, and basement-dwelling geniuses were uploading the sum of human knowledge onto servers held together with duct tape and hope. The internet wasn't a marketplace. It was a library of Babel that anyone with a 56K modem could access. Into this utopia of digital anarchy waltzed the titans of old media, newspapers, magazines, broadcasters, institutions with 100-year-old legacies and printing presses the size of small dinosaurs. They saw the burgeoning web and in a moment of collective, lemming-like panic, decided they had to be there. The strategy: shovel everything online for free. Every article, every investigation, every carefully crafted column that once cost $1 at the newsstand was now available in its entirety at the click of a mouse. It was a land grab. The goal wasn't profit, the goal was eyeballs. They were planting flags on digital territory, convinced that once they had the audience, a magical business model would descend from the heavens, woven from pure fiber optic light, and make them all rich. This was the original sin. They took their most valuable asset, quality, vetted information, and devalued it to zero. They spent a solid decade training an entire generation of humans, a global population of digital natives, to believe that professional journalism was an ambient resource, something that just existed, like air or background radiation. You wouldn't pay for air, would you? So why would you pay for an article? This act of giving away the farm wasn't just a business miscalculation. It was a fundamental reprogramming of societal expectations. The very concept of paying for digital text became alien, almost offensive. Cause the internet is born with a utopian culture of information wants to be free. Effect: legacy media companies, terrified of being left behind, dump their entire archives online for free to capture market share. Consequence: an entire generation of consumers is conditioned to see high-quality content as a zero-cost commodity, creating an economic black hole from which the industry has never fully escaped. Meanwhile, the print world was hemorrhaging. Subscription numbers, the bedrock of their financial stability for a century, began a decline so steep it looked like an ECG chart during cardiac arrest. Advertisers started eyeing the digital space, not because it was profitable yet, but because it was new and shiny. The executives saw their online traffic numbers exploding and patted themselves on the back. Look at our reach. Millions of unique visitors. They celebrated these vanity metrics, ignoring the fact that each of these millions of visitors was contributing exactly $0 to the bottom line. It was like boasting about the number of people window shopping outside your store, while your cash register is gathering dust. The entire industry was running on fumes and the vague promise of a future where digital ad revenue would save them all. This created a bizarre dichotomy in the physical world. Their product was under lock and key. You can just walk into a printing press and take a few thousand copies of the morning edition. But online, the digital equivalent was a free-for-all buffet. They had created a beast with an insatiable appetite for free content, and they were feeding it their own limbs to keep it happy. There was no plan B. The dominant philosophy was to build the audience first and worry about monetization later. a strategy that works great for cults, but is slightly less effective for shareholder-owned corporations. Every click was a validation of their strategy, and every stagnant print subscription was a problem for another day. The meta commentary here is just the sheer, breathtaking lack of foresight. These were not scrappy startups, these were media empires who, when faced with a disruptive new technology, chose to participate in the most self-destructive way imaginable. They saw the digital freight train coming and decided the best course of action was to lie down on the tracks and start handing out free samples of their product to the passengers. They fundamentally misunderstood the medium. They saw the internet as just another broadcast channel, like television or radio, where you give away the content to sell ads. They failed to realize that the internet's interactive, shareable, and infinitely reproducible nature made their content both more valuable and more vulnerable than ever before. They had willingly, enthusiastically walked into a trap of their own design. The foundation was laid for a decade of desperation, a panic scramble to put the genie back in the bottle after it had already granted everyone's wish for free news, and the first, most desperate solutions were just around the corner, ready to make everyone miserable. So, there they were, media giants sitting on mountains of digital traffic with bank accounts running on empty. The vague, optimistic promise of a future business model couldn't pay journalists' salaries forever. The pressure was mounting. Then, like a mirage in the desert, the solution appeared. It was called digital advertising. And for a hot second, it looked like the savior they had been praying for. The concept was simple. A direct translation from their print playbook. Sell space next to the words. But the internet wasn't paper. It was a chaotic, interactive canvas. And the ads it spawned were a different breed of monster entirely. This was the dawn of the banner ad. The gaudy, flashing rectangles that promised you could win a free iPod or learn this one weird trick to lose belly fat. They were the digital equivalent of a screaming roadside billboard, slapped onto the top, bottom, and sides of every article. Then came their more demonic cousins, the pop-up ad, a digital jump scare that hijacked your screen, and the auto-playing video ad, which would suddenly blast audio in a quiet office, causing immediate city-wide panic. Publishers embraced this with the zeal of the newly converted. Their websites, once relatively clean repositories of information, became digital Times Squares at midnight, a sensory assault of blinking, shouting, and tracking. The glass castle of ad revenue was being built, and it was glorious, shimmering, and blindingly tacky. For a while, the money flowed. Advertisers were thrilled to have new, measurable ways to reach millions of people. Publishers were just thrilled to have any money at all. They hired sales teams to sell impressions and click-throughs, turning their readership into a commodity to be bought and sold. The user in this equation was no longer a reader. They were an eyeball, a potential lead, a demographic profile to be targeted. The quality of the user experience wasn't just a low priority. It was actively sacrificed for the sake of one more ad slot. Page load time slowed to a crawl as dozens of ad scripts fought for bandwidth. Laptop fans would spin up like jet engines, trying to render the animated chaos. It was hostile architecture, built right into the browser. But here's the thing about the internet. It isn't a one-way broadcast. The audience can fight back, and fight back they did. This wasn't a coordinated protest. It was a slow, creeping, grassroots rebellion. It started with a few clever developers who were just as annoyed as everyone else. They created simple browser extensions, little pieces of software that could identify and block ad-serving scripts. Before they ever loaded, they were called ad blockers, and they were the digital catapults aimed squarely at the publisher's fragile glass castle. The adoption was slow at first, a tool for the tech-savvy, but word spread. Friends told friends. Tech blogs wrote explainers. Soon, installing an ad blocker became as standard as installing a web browser. This was the moment the entire model shattered. Cause, desperate to monetize their free content, publishers carpet-bombed their websites with slow, intrusive, and privacy-invading advertisements. Effect, users, empowered by the open nature of the web, adopted ad-blocking software by the tens of millions to reclaim a usable browsing experience. Consequence, the primary, and in many cases only, revenue stream for online journalism evaporated almost overnight, triggering a full-blown industry-wide panic. The very people the publishers needed to see the ads were now equipped with shields that made them invisible. It was an economic extinction-level event. One snapshot from the era showed that in a single year, ad block usage on desktop computers jumped by over 40%, effectively deleting a massive chunk of the publisher's potential revenue. The publisher's reaction was a predictable mix of outrage and denial. They called it theft. They claimed users were stealing content by not paying for it with their attention. They put up pleading banners, "Please disable your ad blocker to support our journalism," which, in a moment of beautiful irony, were often blocked by the ad blockers themselves. The meta commentary here is the spectacular failure to self-reflect. They never stopped to ask why millions of people were actively seeking out ways to avoid their ads. They couldn't admit that. They had created a user experience so fundamentally awful that people would rather risk breaking a website than endure it. They had poisoned their own well. In their relentless quest for clicks and impressions, they had treated their audience with contempt. And the audience, quite reasonably, responded by taking away their toys. This wasn't a battle over the ethics of advertising. It was a popular revolt against digital pollution. Users didn't hate the concept of a brand supporting a publication they liked. They hated that their computer was being hijacked, their data was being harvested, and their reading flow was being obliterated by a seizure-inducing ad for a car they would never buy. The ad revenue apocalypse wasn't a tragedy that happened to the news industry. It was a wound they gouged into their own side, then watched in horror as it refused to stop bleeding. The glass castle was in ruins. The magical savior of digital advertising was dead. And with their only lifeboat sinking, the publishers, now truly desperate, began looking for a new solution. A much more aggressive, much more direct, and much more annoying solution. The age of free for all was officially over. The bouncers were about to be hired. The ad revenue castle had crumbled. The digital catapults of the ad-blocking rebellion had done their job with brutal efficiency. And in the smoking ruins of their only business model, publishers finally faced the terrifying truth they had been avoiding for 15 years. They had to ask people for money directly. The party was over. The era of the free-for-all, the grand utopian experiment in giving away the crown jewels, had ended in a predictable, fiery crash. It was time for Plan B, which, confusingly, was actually the original Plan A of every business since the dawn of commerce. Charge for the product. And so, with all the grace of a reversing dump truck, the paywall was born. Imagine the internet as a sprawling city for years. The grandest buildings, the libraries of the New York Times, the archives of the Guardian had their doors wide open. They practically begged you to come inside, wander the halls, and read whatever you wanted. Now, overnight, those same doors were slammed shut. In their place stood a grim-faced digital bouncer with a clipboard and a credit card reader. The once welcoming public square was now an exclusive, members-only club. You want to read this article about city council zoning? That'll be $15 a month. Want to finish that investigative piece on corporate malpractice? Show us your credentials. The open invitation was revoked. This wasn't a subtle shift. It was a digital declaration of war on the browsing habits of an entire planet. The first paywalls were marvels of user-hostile design. A giant, screen-blocking overlay would descend mid-article, like a digital guillotine, demanding you subscribe to continue reading. It was the online equivalent of a librarian snatching a book out of your hands and demanding your wallet. Publishers tried a few different flavors of this new barricade. There was the hard paywall, the most aggressive of the bunch. You couldn't read a single word without subscribing. It was a brick wall, effective for publications with die-hard niche audiences, like financial journals, but a death sentence for general news. Then came the more common approach, the metered paywall. This was the drug dealer model. The first taste is free. You'd get, say, 10 free articles a month, just enough to get you hooked on their reporting, just enough to make them a part of your daily routine. But on your 11th click, the bouncer would step in your way. The pop-up would appear. You've reached your free article limit. It was a calculated, frustrating, and often brilliant strategy to convert casual readers into paying customers. It turned reading the news into a game of resource management, forcing you to ask, is this headline really worth one of my precious free articles? The user backlash was instantaneous and volcanic. An entire generation, conditioned by the publishers themselves to see news as a free utility, reacted with pure outrage. The comment sections on the articles they could still access were filled with rage. Greedy, sellouts, information should be free. It was a beautiful display of cognitive dissonance, conveniently ignoring the fact that the journalists who wrote the articles enjoyed trivial things, like eating food and paying rent. Cause, the catastrophic collapse of the ad-supported revenue model left publishers with no choice but to seek direct payment from readers. Effect, they erected various forms of paywalls, abruptly ending the 15-year era of unlimited free access to professionally produced content. Consequence, this ignited a fierce culture war with their own audience, creating widespread resentment and immediately kicking off a new arms Race focused on circumventing these digital barriers. The meta commentary is about the sheer, brutal whiplash of it all. Publishers spent a decade screaming, "Come in, everyone's welcome," and then, without warning, changed the locks and started demanding a cover charge. Their execution lacked any semblance of finesse. It wasn't presented as a value proposition, "Help us create the journalism you love," but as a hostage situation. "Pay us, or the article gets it." This move irrevocably changed their relationship with their readers. It was no longer a conversation or a community. It was a transaction, a cold, hard, and deeply adversarial one. They went from being trusted sources of information to being just another recurring charge on a credit card statement, another subscription to manage in the ever-growing 10-subscription hydra that modern life was becoming. They were building toll booths on a highway they had originally advertised as free. And while some people, particularly loyal readers of a specific publication, were willing to pay, millions were not. They saw it as a betrayal. More importantly, they saw it as a challenge. The internet, after all, abhors a vacuum, and it despises a paywall even more. The same user ingenuity that had spawned the ad blocker was now being aimed at this new, even more infuriating obstacle. People started sharing passwords. They discovered that clearing their browser cookies would often reset the monthly article counter. The cat and mouse game had just begun. The publishers had built their wall, but the users were already sharpening their digital shovels, ready to tunnel underneath it. This, in turn, would force the publishers to escalate, to deploy even more desperate, even more technically invasive measures to protect their newfound, precious subscription revenue. The era of polite requests was over. It was time to get nasty. The paywall was up, but it was leaky, like a hastily built dam. It had cracks. And the water, the precious, subscription-dodging readers, was trickling through. Users, in their infinite and spiteful ingenuity, had quickly discovered the paywall's weak points. The most popular trick was the incognito mode hack, where opening the article in a private browsing window would often reset the free article counter, fooling the site into thinking you were a brand new visitor. Others would dutifully clear their browser cookies, the digital equivalent of wiping their fingerprints, to achieve the same effect. It was a digital guerrilla war fought in the trenches of browser settings menus. But publishers were watching. Their analytics showed people hitting the paywall and then, moments later, accessing the content anyway. They were furious. They saw this not as a sign of a flawed strategy, but as mass-scale theft. And they zeroed in on one specific behavior they believed was the root of all evil: the simple, humble act of copy and paste. In their paranoid boardroom meetings, they envisioned a nightmare scenario. One person pays for a subscription, logs in, copies the entire text of a groundbreaking investigative report, and then pastes it into an email chain for 1,000 of their closest friends. Or worse, posts it on a public forum or a free blog, liberating the content for the entire world and rendering their precious paywall utterly pointless. Their solution was not to create more value or a better user experience, to make subscribing more attractive. No, that would be far too logical. Their solution was to break the internet. They decided to disable copy and paste. Let that sink in. They chose to sabotage one of the most fundamental, elemental functions of personal computing. A command so basic it's practically encoded in our collective muscle memory right next to undo. This wasn't just putting a bouncer at the door. This was sending a security guard to follow you around the library and physically smack your notebook away every time you tried to jot down a quote. It was a breathtakingly aggressive move, a declaration that they no longer trusted their readers with the very words they were publishing. The weapon of choice was a small, insidious piece of JavaScript, a few lines of code, slipped into the website's back end. That acted as a digital curse. It would intercept the user's commands. You'd move your mouse to highlight a sentence, and the text would frustratingly refuse to select. You'd hit Ctrl+C, the universal command for copy, and get nothing. Silence. Some sites went a step further, disabling the right-click menu entirely, plunging users back into a pre-GUI dark age. Others would add insult to injury, throwing up a smug little pop-up message: Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. Content on this site may not be copied. It was the digital equivalent of a parent saying, "Because I said so." This was a profound violation of the unwritten contract between a user and a website. People expect certain things to just work. The scroll bar scrolls, links link, and copy pastes. By disabling it, publishers were not just protecting their content. They were fundamentally altering the user's computer against their will. Cause, publishers, in a state of heightened paranoia, identified copy pasting as a primary method for users to share paywalled content. and bypass their subscription systems. Effect, they implemented aggressive JavaScript code to disable text selection, the copy command, and sometimes the entire right-click menu on their web pages. Consequence, this action created a deeply hostile user experience, punishing all visitors including loyal, paying subscribers by treating every single person as a potential content pirate, thereby sparking a new wave of intense user frustration and resentment. The meta commentary here is about the sheer, unadulterated contempt for the user that this decision represents. It is a move born from a mindset that sees the audience not as a community to be cultivated, but as a threat to be managed. Think about the legitimate reasons people copy text. A student quoting a source for a research paper, an office worker sharing a key statistic with their team on Slack, a visually impaired person using a screen reader that relies on selecting text, a casual reader simply wanting to save a memorable line. All of them, in this new regime, were collateral damage. They were all treated as thieves in the making. This decision wasn't a scalpel. It was a sledgehammer. It failed to distinguish between a pirate trying to clone an entire article and a paying subscriber trying to copy a single sentence. It was a declaration of total control, an assertion that once you were on their digital property, your browser and your computer operated under their rules. It was the ultimate my house, my rules argument, except the house was a website you were invited into, and the rules involved disabling basic motor functions. This was the point of no return. The relationship was no longer just transactional. It was openly combative. The publishers had thrown down the gauntlet, and in doing so, they had massively, catastrophically underestimated the resolve and the creativity of a sufficiently annoyed internet user. The war was about to get personal. The trap was set. The JavaScript curses were woven into the fabric of news sites across the web. And so, the average, unsuspecting user logged on, coffee in hand, ready to catch up on the day's events. They clicked on a headline. The article loaded. They started to read. They found a brilliant quote, a shocking statistic, a sentence so perfectly crafted it deserved to be saved. Their fingers, moving with an instinct honed over decades of computer use, went to highlight the text, and that's when it happened. The collision. The moment where a user's perfectly reasonable expectation met a corporation's paranoid delusion. The first emotion wasn't anger, it was confusion, a deep, technical confusion. Is my mouse broken? You try again, you double-click, you drag the cursor with exaggerated slowness, nothing. The words remain stubbornly unselected, locked behind an invisible shield. Your brain cycles through the possibilities. Is the site still loading? Is my browser bugged? You try highlighting text on a different website. It works perfectly. Then you go back. Still nothing. And then, slowly, the gears in your head click into place. It's not you. It's not your computer. The website is doing this to you. On purpose. This moment of realization is followed by a flicker of pure disbelief, which is then immediately consumed by a white-hot surge of incandescent rage. This was the user experience nosedive in real time. The digital fortress, so cleverly designed to keep the pirates out, had slammed its portcullis down on the fingers of every single citizen inside. The most infuriating part was who it punished the most, the good guys. Think of the student, trying to cite a source for their thesis, now forced to manually redcopy a 200-word paragraph, introducing the potential for typos and misquotes. Think of the researcher, compiling data from multiple sources, their workflow completely shattered. Think of the office worker, trying to share market analysis with their team, who now has to resort to the digital equivalent of holding a megaphone up to their screen. And the ultimate insult, the deepest betrayal, was reserved for the paying subscribers. These were the loyalists, the ones who saw the paywall and said, yes, this journalism is valuable, and I will support it. They had willingly paid the entrance fee to the exclusive club. Their reward? To be treated with the exact same suspicion as everyone else. They were paying for a premium experience that was, in a very practical way, worse than the free internet they could access anywhere else. It was like buying a VIP ticket to a concert only to be told you were not allowed to take pictures, or even hum along to the music. The message was loud and clear. We've taken your money, but we fundamentally do not trust you. This is where the fortress became a cage. The website was no longer a window to the world. It was a diorama behind reinforced glass. You can look, but you absolutely cannot touch. Cause, the newly deployed copy-paste blocking scripts began interfering with the daily, legitimate workflows of millions of ordinary users. Effect, instead of just stopping pirates, the feature created a constant source of friction and frustration for everyone, turning simple tasks into laborious chores and making the websites feel broken and hostile. Consequence: the overall user experience plummeted, leading to a wave of public complaints, ridicule on social media, subscription cancellations from angry customers, and a highly motivated user base now actively seeking ways to defeat the system out of pure spite. The meta commentary here is the profound disconnect between the corporate boardroom and the end-user's reality. The executives who sign off on this saw a neat and tidy solution on a PowerPoint slide. Implement script to block content exfiltration. They saw their readers as a faceless horde of potential thieves and their content as a precious resource to be locked in a digital vault. What they completely failed to grasp was the texture of the internet itself. The web is not a series of static, isolated documents. It's a living, breathing, interconnected ecosystem. Its entire value is built on the ability to link, quote, share, and remix. Taking away copy-paste is like trying to improve a library by banning note-taking. You haven't made it more secure, you've just made it useless. Suddenly, the most valuable currency on the internet wasn't access to information, but the freedom to interact with it. And these major news organizations had just voluntarily branded themselves as the least free, most restrictive places on the web. They had picked a fight with a fundamental principle of the open internet, all to solve a problem of their own making. The frustration wasn't just about a minor inconvenience, it was about principle. It felt personal. The website was actively, aggressively getting in the user's way, and in doing so, it had inadvertently created an army of enemies, all of whom were now thinking the exact same thing. Oh, you think you can stop me? Challenge accepted. The user was angry, but this wasn't just simple, fleeting frustration. It was a deeper, more primal kind of anger. It was the specific, indignant rage you feel when a machine tells you no for a stupid reason. Publishers, in their infinite wisdom, had stumbled face first into a well-documented psychological minefield known as reactance. The principle is brutally simple. When you take away someone's freedom, their immediate, gut-level instinct is to fight to get it back. It's the reason a wet paint, do not touch sign is a universal invitation to touch the paint. It is why telling a teenager not to listen to a certain band guarantees that band a new #1 fan. By making the simple act of copying text forbidden, publishers hadn't secured it. They had made it irresistible. They thought they were writing a line of code. What they were actually doing was issuing a global, public dare. The message wasn't please respect our copyright. The message was you can't do this. We are taking this ability away from you. And the internet, a sprawling collective of defiant, clever, and often bored individuals, heard that message and replied in unison, watch me. This single, arrogant miscalculation transformed the entire dynamic. It was no longer a simple transaction of reading an article. It was now a game. This was the accidental gamification of content theft. The publishers, in their attempt to create an impenetrable fortress, had inadvertently designed the world's most popular puzzle game. Each article was a new level. The copy-paste blocker was the main obstacle, the big flashing red force field. The user was the player, and the objective was clear: extract the text. Suddenly, a boring Tuesday afternoon of browsing the news became an exciting side quest. People who had no intention of copying anything were now possessed by a burning desire to defeat the system, just to prove it could be done. The satisfaction wasn't in having the text, it was in the victory of taking it. Overnight, every article behind a copy-paste blocker became a tiny digital escape room. The prize wasn't the information, it was the glory. This phenomenon is a cousin of the Streisand effect, where an attempt to suppress information only serves to make it spread further and faster. By drawing a giant red circle around their text and screaming unobtainable, they made it the most interesting text on the internet. Message boards and tech forums lit up with conversations. The question wasn't about the content of the articles, but about the mechanics of the game. Hey, did you see the new blocker on TechCrunch? Has anyone found a workaround yet? It was a collaborative, crowdsourced effort to dismantle the publisher's defenses, piece by piece. Cause the implementation of a hard, absolute restriction on a fundamental user freedom. The ability to copy text triggered a powerful psychological reactance across the user base. Effect: this transformed the user's passive annoyance into an active, motivated desire to defy the restriction, not just to access the content, but to reclaim their sense of autonomy and control over their own computer. Consequence: beating the copy-paste blocker became a widespread, gamified challenge, with users collaborating to find and share cheat codes, turning the publisher's security measure into a sport, and accelerating its ultimate failure. The publishers thought they were playing chess, moving their little JavaScript pawns to protect their king. The users, meanwhile, were playing a completely different game, one where the goal was to flip the whole chessboard over. The meta commentary is on the spectacular failure of corporations to understand the culture of the very medium they operate in. The internet was built by tinkerers, hackers, and people who believe in the open exchange of information. It has a built-in immune system that instinctively attacks anything that feels like censorship or arbitrary control. To this culture, a feature like a copy-paste blocker isn't a legitimate security tool. It's a bug. It's a flaw in the system to be rooted out and fixed. Publishers saw their users as passive consumers. They failed to realize they were dealing with millions of active, intelligent agents who would gleefully spend hours of their time dismantling a system, not for financial gain, but for the sheer, unadulterated joy of proving a point. This psychological shift was the publisher's doom. They had taken a dispersed, disorganized group of mildly annoyed readers and united them against a common enemy, the smug, condescending JavaScript that told them what they could and couldn't do. They had created a villain, and in doing so, they had inadvertently created millions of heroes. Every person who figured out a workaround became a digital freedom fighter, sharing their knowledge with others. The battle wasn't about copyright anymore. It was about freedom. It was about the principle of the thing, and the first, most beautifully simple weapon in this new rebellion was already sitting there, built into every browser, just waiting to be discovered. The gauntlet had been thrown down. The internet, now fully engaged in the game of break the website, began its assault. The publishers had built their digital fortress with complex JavaScript and smug copyright warnings. They felt secure. They felt in control. They believed they had outsmarted the freeloading masses. What they failed to account for was that the average user, when faced with a locked door, will not only look for the key but will also check to see if the windows are open, if the back door is unlocked, and if the walls are made of cardboard. And in this case, the back door wasn't just unlocked. It was wide open with a welcome mat in front of it. The first great cheat code of the copy-paste wars wasn't some arcane hacking technique. It didn't require a deep understanding of code or a special piece of software. It was a humble, overlooked, and utterly devastatingly effective feature built into every web browser since the dawn of time. The print command. It was a moment of collective, global discovery. A user, seething with rage after being told they couldn't copy a paragraph, would have a moment of inspiration, a thought so simple, so pure. It was brilliant. Fine, I can't copy it, but can I print it? They'd move their cursor up to the file menu, click print, and a preview window would pop up. And in that window, a miracle. The article was there, but it was different. It was clean. The flashing banner ads were gone. The annoying navigation bar had vanished. And most importantly, the JavaScript curse, the malicious little script that blocked their mouse, was nowhere to be found. It was the pure, unadulterated text, reborn in the sanitized environment of the print preview. In this digital cleanroom, the website's obnoxious security measures couldn't breathe. They simply didn't run. The text was free. It was selectable. It was alive. From there, the final move was a checkmate in one. Next to the print button was a drop-down menu for the destination. Instead of selecting a physical printer, the user would choose Save as PDF. 3 clicks. File, print, save. The result, a perfect, pristine, fully searchable PDF document of the entire article, saved locally on their own computer, a document free from all of the website's hostile nonsense. A document where they could select, copy, search, and archive to their heart's content. It was a total, comprehensive, and humiliating defeat for the publishers. Cause users, actively searching for weaknesses in the website's defenses, began probing basic browser functionalities that the publishers had overlooked. Effect, they discovered that the print to PDF function completely bypassed the anti-copying scripts, as browsers use a separate, cleaner rendering engine for printing that ignores most interactive JavaScript. Consequence, this simple, 3-click method became the first globally shared, devastatingly effective workaround, rendering the entire copy-paste blocking strategy instantly obsolete for anyone with a basic knowledge of their computer. The great digital wall of the publishers had been defeated by the digital equivalent of a step ladder. The meta commentary here is just the sheer, laugh-out-loud irony. The publishers had invested time, money, and developer resources into building what they thought was a sophisticated digital rights managing system. They had waged a psychological war on their users. In the great war against the user, publishers brought a JavaScript nuke. The user responded by pressing Ctrl+P. The nuke was a dud. It was a solution so glaringly obvious it barely even qualified as a hack. It was more like pointing out that the emperor had no clothes, and also, his fortress had no roof. This oversight revealed that the people implementing these systems didn't have a holistic understanding of the web. They secured the front door with a dozen locks and then left the garage wide open. This victory was intoxicating for the user base. It was proof that the system wasn't just hostile, it was stupid. It was a poorly thought out panic move, and it was full of holes. The print-to-PDF trick spread like wildfire across forums, social media, and tech blogs. It became common knowledge, the standard first line of attack against any lockdown article. It was empowering. It demonstrated that the control the publishers tried to assert was a fragile illusion. And this initial, glorious success only emboldened the community. They had found one unlocked door. Now they were going to start looking for more. They were going to start looking for the master key. The print-to-PDF victory was sweet. It was a triumph of common sense over corporate nonsense. But in the fast-evolving arms race of the copy-paste wars, it was level 1. It was the tutorial. For many, it was the perfect solution, but for a growing number of users, the curious, the defiant, the technically proficient, it felt a bit clumsy. Creating a whole new PDF just to grab a single quote felt like using a wrecking ball. To open a pickle jar, there had to be a more elegant way, a more direct way. It was time to level up. It was time to look under the hood. Every modern web browser comes with a secret weapon, hidden in plain sight. It's usually found in the right-click menu, under a deceptively simple name, inspect element or view page source. These aren't tools for the average user, they're the developer's toolkit. The digital equivalent of an architect's blueprints. Clicking on it opens a new pane. A daunting cascade of colorful, indecipherable text, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's the very DNA of the website. The raw code that tells your browser what to display and how to display it. And it was here, in the belly of the beast, that the rebellion found its master key. Picture the scene. A user, thwarted by the copy blocker, annoyed by the multi-step process of creating a PDF, right-clicks on the paragraph they want and hits inspect. The screen splits. On one side is the beautiful, rendered article. On the other, the chaotic matrix of its source code. But as they move their mouse over the lines of code, something magical happens. The corresponding elements on the webpage light up. And then they see it. Buried in the sea of p tags and div greater than classes, like a diamond in a coal mine, is the pure, unadulterated text of the article. It's just sitting there, naked, unprotected. The JavaScript curse that blocks your mouse on the main page has no power here. In the sterile operating theater of the code inspector. This was the ultimate aha moment. The publisher's entire security strategy was a facade. It was a cheap magic trick. They put a muscular bouncer in front of a velvet rope, but the bouncer was a hologram and the rope was made of licorice. The website's own source code was the ultimate cheat sheet against its security theater. Cause, empowered by their initial success, tech-savvy users sought a more direct and efficient way to bypass the copy-paste restrictions than creating a PDF. Effect, they turned to the browser's built-in developer tools, like Inspect Elements, and realized the raw HTML of the page contained the complete, unprotected text, which could be copied without any interference. Consequence, this method became the definitive power user workaround, exposing the anti-copying measures as a fundamentally superficial illusion that could be shattered with a single right-click. The meta commentary here is about a foundational, inescapable truth of the internet that the publishers desperately wished wasn't real. In order for your browser to show you an article, the server must send the entire article to your computer. All of it. The text, the images, the code. It has to live, however temporarily, on your machine. Trying to prevent you from copying it is like mailing you a letter, and then trying to remotely prevent you from reading the words on the paper you holding in your own hands. It's a physical impossibility. Inspect Element isn't a hack, it's simply looking at the letter. The anti-copying script is just a polite and ultimately unenforceable request to please not look at it too closely. The website's code read like a villain's monologue, revealing their entire plan and all their weaknesses right on the screen for anyone to see. This discovery changed the game forever. It proved that the publisher's control was a carefully constructed lie. They couldn't stop you. They never could. All they could do was make it slightly annoying, in the hope that you'd give up and pay. But now, the users had the powerful, foolproof methods to get any content they wanted. The fortress was not just breached, its blueprints were now public knowledge. The rebellion had won. And this, right here, is where the story should have ended, but it didn't. Because in a twist of logic so bizarre it could only happen in the modern digital economy, the publishers, whose content was now being effortlessly plundered, were about to turn around and start begging the plunderers for help. The paradox was about to begin. The users had one. Or so it seemed. With the devastating one-two punch of print to PDF and inspect element, the publisher's anti-copying fortress was a smoking ruin. The rebellion had found the cheat codes. The game was over. Any user who wanted the text could get the text, and there wasn't a thing the publishers could do about it. In any logical universe, this is where the story would pivot. The publishers, realizing their strategy was a failure, would have retreated, regrouped, and tried something new. But we are not in a logical universe. We are on the internet, and so, in a feat of cognitive dissonance that would make a philosopher's brain short-circuit, the publishers doubled down on a strategy that was not just contradictory, but certifiably insane. Having just treated their users like a swarm of digital locusts, a plague of content-thieving pirates, they immediately turned around and asked for a favor. On the very same pages, where they had deployed their hostile, user-insulting code, a new element began to take prominence. They were small, colorful, and cheerful. They were the social media share buttons, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, LinkedIn. Little icons of pure, unadulterated hypocrisy. Sitting right next to the text they had just forbidden you from touching. Every article became a schizophrenic mess. The top half of the page screamed, "Don't you dare touch our precious words," while the bottom half chirped, "PSSD, hey, share this with all your friends." This was the great social media paradox. The publishers had built a business model that was fundamentally at war with itself. On one hand, their survival depended on the paywall. They needed to lock content down to force people to subscribe. On the other hand, their growth depended entirely on social media. The days of people dutifully typing www. publication com into their browser were over. The modern reader doesn't go to the news comes to them. Scrolling past on a social feed between a cat video and a photo of their cousin's brunch. This river of referred traffic from social platforms was the lifeblood of their audience acquisition strategy. It was the only way to get their articles in front of new eyeballs that might, just might, convert into paying subscribers. So they needed you, the user they fundamentally distrusted, to become their most valuable marketing asset. They needed you to do their distribution for them, for free. They wanted you to take the link to their locked-down, user-hostile article and post it for all your followers to see. This is a level of corporate audacity that is truly breathtaking. It's like a restaurant owner banning you from tasting the food, then asking you to stand on the street outside and tell everyone how delicious it is. Cause, despite successfully making their own page content difficult to interact with, publishers remained existentially dependent on traffic from social media to find new readers and potential subscribers. Effect, they aggressively integrated social media share buttons onto every article page, creating a direct call to action that begged users to promote the very content the site was simultaneously holding hostage. Consequence, this birthed a deeply paradoxical user experience where the website's design was sending to completely opposite messages at once. You are a thief we must stop, and you are a partner we desperately need. The meta commentary is about the sheer organizational chaos this reveals. It is clear that the subscription department and the marketing department of these companies had never once spoken to each other. One team was busy building digital walls, while the other was desperately handing out invitations to a party happening behind those walls. They wanted the benefits of the open, shareable web viral traffic, network effects, brand visibility without any of the perceived risks. Like people actually, sharing the information. They wanted the link to travel, but for the content to stay put. This absurd situation put the user in a bizarre position. The website was simultaneously an adversary and a supplicant. It was a digital frenemy that insulted you with one hand and begged for help with the other. The publisher's dream scenario was that millions of people would share a link to an article that most of their followers couldn't even read, hoping that a small fraction would be so intrigued by a headline that they'd pull out their credit card on the spot. It was a strategy based on a profound misunderstanding of how and why people share things online, and it was about to backfire spectacularly. So there it was, the share button, sitting there on the page like a lonely, optimistic puppy. It was the publisher's olive branch, their desperate plea for engagement in a sea of their own user-hostile code. But let us take a step back and ask a fundamental question. Why do people share things on the internet? It's not just an act of robotic link distribution. Sharing is performance, it's communication, it's identity. You share an article to show your friends you're smart, or funny, or politically engaged. You share it to start a debate. And the most crucial element of a successful share, the thing that actually makes people click, is the context. The currency of social media is the pull quote. It's that one searing sentence from the article that you copy, paste into your tweet or your Facebook post, and then wrap in your own commentary. It's the hook. Can you believe the CEO said this? Followed by the damning quote, "This statistic right here is terrifying." Followed by the shocking number, "This is the art of the share." You are not just a delivery service for a link. You are a curator, an editor, telling your audience what's important and why they should care. Now, with that in mind, look back at the publisher's grand strategy. They are begging you to perform this vital marketing function for them while actively disabling the one tool required to do it: copy and paste. This is not just a minor inconvenience, it is a fundamental misunderstanding of human communication. They have given you a megaphone, the share button, and then placed a gag order on you, the copy-paste block. The result was millions of people just silently pointing at a locked door. The user is faced with a ridiculous choice. They can either manually, painstakingly recopy the quote, a task so tedious that virtually no one would ever do it, or they can do what the publishers apparently wanted: blind share. Just drop the link into the void with a generic, useless comment like "interesting article." This kind of context-free sharing is the lowest form of engagement. It has all the personality of a spam bit. It gets ignored. No one clicks. The share button, in this environment, ceased to be a feature. It became a digital cry for help. It was the publisher admitting, through a tiny, clickable icon, that they were completely addicted to the traffic from social networks, yet utterly clueless about the culture of those networks. Cause, the publisher's anti-copy-paste measures directly sabotage the core user behavior of quoting and contextualizing, which is the engine of meaningful social sharing. Effect, users who attempted to share content found it impossible to extract the key hook, a specific quote or statistic, to make their post engaging for their own followers. Consequence, this led to a rise in low-quality, blind link dropping that generated minimal engagement, thereby defeating the entire purpose of the share and revealing the publisher's strategy to be self-defeating. The meta commentary here is on the cargo cult mentality of corporate social media strategy. The executives saw that other, more successful digital media companies were getting massive traffic from shares, so they said, "We need shares to put share buttons everywhere." They mimicked the appearance of a successful strategy without understanding the underlying mechanics that made it work. They wanted the end result, viral traffic, without participating in the give and take of the social web. They wanted to maintain absolute one-way control over their property while simultaneously benefiting from a system built on decentralized, user-driven conversation. They wanted to be a broadcast tower in the middle of a public park, and they couldn't understand why no one was listening. This whole setup was a joke. A platform that distrusts its audience so profoundly that it cripples their ability to interact with the text has no business asking that same audience to be its brand ambassador. It's a parasitic relationship, and users could feel it. The request to share our article felt less like an invitation and more like a demand from an ungrateful host. The publishers were asking their readers to do the hard work of marketing, to stake their own social capital by recommending a link and offering nothing but a broken, frustrating experience in return. The user was stuck. They wanted to share the story, but the system was designed to make sharing it impossible. There was a vacuum. A new tool was needed, a tool that could capture not just the link, but the context, a tool that the publishers couldn't block, and the internet, as it always does, was about to provide one. The system was broken. The publishers wanted shares, but they had sabotaged the very act of sharing. The user was in a bind. They had the power to extract the text for themselves using the print to PDF or inspect element cheat codes, but those were personal victories. They were tools for acquisition, not for communication. How do you share that crucial, damning paragraph with your 5,000 Twitter followers? You can't exactly post a block of raw HTML and expect it to go viral. The social web demanded a different kind of weapon. It needed to be fast, visual, and above all, unstoppable. And the perfect tool was already there, waiting. It was ancient. It was universal. It was the screenshot. When all the sophisticated code and clever workarounds failed to solve the problem of sharing, users rediscovered the oldest and most profound magic in the digital world: just taking a picture of the screen. It was a moment of beautiful, low-tech clarity, a collective, global head slap. Wait a minute. Why are we fighting their code inside the browser? We can just go over it with the simple press of a button. Print screen. Command plus Shift plus for the user could declare total victory. It was the digital equivalent of seeing a sign that says "Do not describe this room," and responding by painting a perfect, photorealistic replica of the room. The screenshot was the ultimate asymmetrical weapon. The publisher's entire security apparatus lived and died inside the web browser. Their JavaScript could control what your mouse did, what your right-click menu showed, what your copy command registered, but it was powerless beyond that sandbox. It had absolutely no authority over your computer's operating system. The screenshot command doesn't ask the browser for permission. It doesn't acknowledge the website's petty rules. It operates at a higher level of reality, a higher plane of existence. It simply copies the pixels on your screen, a perfect, frozen snapshot of a moment in time, and saves it as an image. The website's digital bouncer can be screaming nitrogen monoxide copying, but the OS-level screenshot function is a satellite in orbit, taking a high-resolution photo from space. Completely immune and indifferent to the chaos on the ground, this wasn't just a workaround. It was the perfect solution to the sharing paradox. It did what a simple copied sentence could never do. A screenshot captures not just the text, but the proof. It preserves the context. You get the incendiary quote, and right above it, the newspaper's logo, the headline, the author's name. It's a receipt. It's an authentic, verifiable piece of evidence, packaged in a universally shareable format, a JPEG or APNG. On visually driven platforms like Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, an image of text is vastly more engaging than plain text or a blind link. It stops the scroll. It draws the eye. The publishers had built a fortress to guard a sentence, and the users responded by airlifting the sentence out with a camera. Faced with the inability to copy-paste text for social media, users sought a tool that could capture and share contextualized snippets of articles quickly and easily. They universally adopted the native screenshot function of their operating systems, a tool that publishers' web-based scripts could not detect, block, or control in any way. Consequence, the screenshot became the de facto standard for sharing locked content, transforming key paragraphs into viral images that spread far wider and faster online than a simple link, completely upending the publisher's entire control strategy. The meta commentary here is on the sublime elegance of a simple solution defeating a complex problem. Publishers had over-engineered a fragile system based on controlling user behavior. Within a specific application, users sidestepped the entire system by using a universal OS-level function. It's a classic case of thinking outside the box, or in this case, literally outside the browser window. The publishers were playing checkers, focused on controlling the pieces on the board. The users picked up the whole board and took a photo of it. The age of the screenshot was born. Social media feeds became a mosaic of these captured paragraphs. It was the new language of online debate. The screenshot was the evidence, the opening argument, and the punchline all in one, and the publishers were utterly powerless to stop it. Their entire strategy of locking down text was now not just a failure, but a laughable, irrelevant relic. They had tried to contain the water and had only succeeded in forcing it to become steam, where it could now travel anywhere, instantly, and without limits. The content was now truly free, in the most chaotic and uncontrollable way imaginable. The screenshots were loose, a million tiny, pixelated lifeboats, each carrying a precious paragraph of premium content, had been launched from the sinking ship of the publisher's website. They were now floating freely in the vast, chaotic ocean of the social media feed. But they weren't just floating, they were being actively propelled by an invisible, powerful, and utterly immoral force, the algorithm. This is the point where the story gets truly, beautifully ironic. The publisher's sworn enemies, the giant social media platforms that had siphoned away their ad revenue and audience, were about to become their unwilling saviors. Let's personify the algorithm. Think of it as a vast, digital god of hunger. It has one prime directive: maximize engagement. It doesn't care about what's true, what's fair, or what's copyrighted. It only cares about what makes people stop scrolling. It craves the little dopamine hits of human interaction, the likes, the angry comments, the retweets, the shares. It is constantly scanning its domain, looking for content that will generate these reactions. And when it finds a piece of high-octane engagement fuel, it straps a rocket to it and blasts it into everyone's eyeballs. And as it turned out, nothing, absolutely nothing, was better engagement fuel than a screenshot of a controversial paragraph from a paywalled news article. Here's why the algorithm fell in love with the screenshot. First, it's visual. An image, even of text, has more stopping power in a crowded feed than a simple link. Second, it's self-contained. A user can consume the entire piece of content, the juicy quote, the shocking statistic, without ever leaving the platform. This is the holy grail for Facebook, Twitter, and the like. Keeping users inside their walled garden is their entire business model. A link, on the other hand, is a doorway out. The algorithm inherently distrusts external links. But a screenshot, that's native content. That's pure, uncut engagement, ready to be consumed on site. So when a user posted a screenshot of a particularly fiery paragraph, the algorithm saw it, tested it, and its digital eyes lit up. People were stopping, they were reading, they were getting angry. They were smashing the like button, they were furiously typing comments. The algorithm's hunger was being sated. Its prime directive was being fulfilled, and so it did what it was designed to do. It showed that. Screenshot to more people, and then more, and then more. Within hours, a single paragraph, liberated from its paywall prison, could be seen by millions. A viral wildfire powered by the very platforms the publishers despised. Cause, the mass sharing of text-based screenshots on social media created a new, highly effective form of engagement-rich content. Effect, the platform's algorithms, programmed to identify and amplify content that keeps users on site and interacting, latched onto these screenshots and promoted them aggressively across their networks. Consequence, the social media giants accidentally became the world's most efficient distribution network for paywall journalism, ensuring the information reached a massive audience while simultaneously ensuring the original publishers received absolutely zero traffic, revenue, or even credit. The meta commentary here is a masterclass in unintended consequences. The publishers' war on copy-paste had led directly to a situation where their content was being distributed more widely than ever, but in a way that completely cut them out of the loop. A single screenshot of a Wall Street Journal paragraph could get more views on Twitter than the original article link ever would. A perfect distribution system where the original author was the only one not invited to the party. The system was now perfectly optimized to reward the user who took the screenshot with likes and retweets and the platform that hosted it with user engagement, while punishing the company that created it. Social media, the great disruptor blamed for gutting the news industry, had become the only thing keeping the actual journalism relevant in the public conversation. It was the ultimate irony. The content became famous, but the source became invisible. The information was everywhere, but the institution behind it was starving. The algorithm, in its blind, relentless pursuit of engagement, was acting as the world's biggest and best library, filled with stolen pages from every newspaper in the world. And everyone was loving it. Everyone, that is, except the people who paid to have those pages written in the first place. They were about to discover another way this new reality was going to hurt them. This time in the one place they thought they were safe, the sacred temple of Google. The social media ecosystem had mutated and now favored the screenshot over the source, cutting publishers out of the viral loop they so desperately wanted to create. But that was just one front in this multidimensional war of incompetence. While they were losing the battle for attention on the chaotic, fast-moving feeds of Twitter and Facebook, they were simultaneously committing a form of ritual suicide in the one place that truly mattered, the calm, orderly, and all-powerful kingdom of Google. And they did it with the very same weapon they had used to alienate their readers, the copy-paste blocker. To understand the scale of this self-sabotage, you have to understand the religion of the modern web. There are many minor gods: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, but there is only one true deity that holds the power of life and death over a website, and its name is Google. Search engine optimization, or SEO, is the modern art of pleasing this god. It is a complex, never-ending ritual of keywords, backlinks, and technical wizardry designed to convince Google's mysterious algorithms that your website is worthy of appearing on that sacred first page of search results. For a news publisher, ranking on Google is not a vanity metric. It's oxygen. It's the primary way the world discovers their content. And the copy-paste blocker was pure, uncut poison to their SEO. The publishers, in their infinite wisdom, had installed a digital tripwire that not only annoyed humans, but also frequently crippled the very spiders Google sends out to crawl and index the web. These Googlebots are designed to read a website's code and understand its content. But the clumsy, aggressive JavaScript that blocked copy-pasting often threw a wrench in the works. It was like trying to read a book while someone is constantly smearing Vaseline on the pages. The Googlebot would arrive, try to render the page, get tangled in the hostile script, and often leave confused, unable to properly index the full text. Even worse, these scripts sometimes created a situation that is a cardinal sin in the church of SEO: cloaking. This is when a website intentionally shows one version of a page to the Googlebot and a different, more restrictive version to a human user. It's a classic bait and switch, and Google despises it. They see it as deceptive and will punish a site's rankings with merciless, algorithmic fury. Many of these anti-copying scripts, by their very nature, were creating a form of accidental cloaking. The publishers were so obsessed with stopping a reader from copying a paragraph that they accidentally told Google their entire library was empty, or, worse, that they were a bunch of black hat spammers. Cause the JavaScript used to disable copy-paste functionality was often poorly implemented, interfering with the ability of Google's web crawlers to properly read, render, and index the full content of an article. In fact, this technical interference could lead to failed indexing, lower quality scores, and even penalties for cloaking, a practice that search engines actively punish. Consequence: publishers saw their search engine rankings for their own articles plummet, effectively making their premium content invisible on the internet's most critical discovery platform and ceding valuable search traffic to their competitors. The meta commentary here is just the sheer, breathtaking foolishness of it all. In their micro-obsession with controlling the behavior of the user who was already on their site, they completely destroyed their ability to attract new users from search. It's the business equivalent of putting so many locks on your front door that you can no longer open it yourself to leave. They were sacrificing their visibility, the very foundation of their future audience, for the illusion of control in the present. The irony is that one of the most powerful signals to Google that your content is valuable is when other people quote it and link back to you. By disabling copy-paste, they were actively discouraging the very organic behavior that would have boosted their rankings. In the first place, they had managed to make themselves invisible to the two main pillars of the internet. Social media algorithms were boosting screenshots of their work, giving them no traffic, and Google's algorithms were now struggling to even see their work, suppressing it in the search results. They had built a beautiful, expensive, and informative library, then bricked up all the doors and windows and wondered why nobody was visiting. But the fallout of this decision wasn't just limited to metrics on a spreadsheet. This technical nightmare had a very real, very damaging human cost for a segment of their audience they had completely forgotten existed. The publishers had managed to make themselves invisible to social media and invisible to Google. Their digital footprint was shrinking by the day, a self-inflicted wound born of paranoia and bad code. But the consequences of their war on the user weren't just confined to abstract metrics like traffic and search rankings. The shrapnel from this digital arms race had hit a group of people who weren't even part of the fight in their single-minded crusade against the content pirate. The publishers had declared millions of users with disabilities as acceptable collateral damage. This is where the story stops being funny and starts getting ugly. Let's talk about web accessibility. It's a simple, vital concept, the idea that the internet should be usable by everyone, including people with vision impairment, hearing loss, motor disabilities, and cognitive differences. It's about building a digital world with curb cuts and ramps, ensuring that no one is left behind. To achieve this, millions of people rely on assistive technologies, tools like screen readers, which read the content of a webpage aloud for blind users, or text-to-speech extensions for users with dyslexia. And the one thing nearly all of these tools have in common is that they need to interact with the text on the page. They need to select it, highlight it, and copy it to their own engines to process it. Now, recall the publisher's weapon of choice, the JavaScript curse that blocks text selection and disables right-click menus. To the average user, it was an annoyance, a frustration, but to someone relying on a screen reader, it was a brick wall. It was a no-entry sign written in a language they were forbidden from reading. When these scripts went live, news sites that were once accessible suddenly went silent. A blind user, who previously could have the day's headlines read to them by their computer, would now be met with a page that their software simply couldn't parse. The tool would try to select the text to read it, the script would block the action, and the result was nothing, just dead, inaccessible silence. In an effort to stop one person from emailing an article to their friend, they made it impossible for a blind person to have the news read to them. That was the trade-off. Cause, in their reckless pursuit of content control, publishers deployed scripts that broke fundamental browser interactions, completely failing to consider the millions of users whose assistive technologies depend on those very functions. Effect, screen readers, text magnifiers, and other accessibility tools were crippled, rendering these vital news websites partially or completely unusable for a huge swath of the disabled community. Consequence, this not only created an ethical catastrophe by locking vulnerable users out of civic and cultural information, but it also exposed these media companies to significant legal risks under disability rights laws. Like the meta commentary here is about the profound, damning negligence this represents. It's one thing to be bad at business strategy. It's another thing entirely to be so careless that you disenfranchise millions of people. It reveals that accessibility was not even an afterthought in their development process. It was a non-thought. No one in the chain of command from the executive who approved the strategy to the developer who wrote the code stopped to ask, how will this affect users who aren't like us? They were so blinded by their obsession with the hypothetical 1% of bad actors that they willingly sacrificed the usability of their product for the 10-15% of the population with some form of disability. This wasn't just a user experience blunder. It was an ethical and potentially legal disaster. Access to news and information is not a luxury. It's a cornerstone of participation in a democratic society, and these major news organizations, who fancy themselves as pillars of that society, were actively putting up barriers to entry for their most vulnerable readers. They had spent years writing self-righteous editorials about equality and inclusion, all while coding a digital world that was explicitly, if accidentally, exclusionary. The war on the user had claimed its most innocent victims, and the publishers, lost in their paranoid feedback loop, didn't even seem to notice. They were too busy gearing up for the next phase of their pointless, escalating conflict. The publishers were losing on all fronts. Their sites were annoying. They were invisible to search engines, and they were an ethical minefield of inaccessibility. A rational organization would have called a ceasefire, admitted defeat, and reevaluated the entire strategy. Instead, they did what every cornered a logical institution does. They escalated. They saw the workarounds, the PDFs, the source code shenanigans, and concluded that their weapon wasn't powerful enough. Their solution to a failing strategy was more of that same failing strategy, but this time with extra malice, and so began the great, pointless script wars, a digital Cold War fought in the browser tabs of millions of unsuspecting readers. The first wave of anti-copying scripts were clumsy. The next wave was just plain nasty. Publishers hired developers to create more sophisticated traps. One popular trick was to allow the user to copy the text, but then hijack the clipboard. When the user pasted the text, it wouldn't be the quote they selected, but a pre-written advertisement. To read more, visit our website at, followed by a link. It was a digital bait and switch, a petty gotcha moment designed to frustrate. Another, more aggressive tactic involved fighting the inspect element workaround directly. They'd use scripts to deliberately scramble the text in the HTML source code, rendering it as gibberish, or even deploy code that could detect when a user opened the developer tools and immediately crashed the page. This was no longer a defensive measure. This was active, offensive cyber warfare against their own readers. The website was now a hostile environment, actively trying to break the user's browser for the crime of right-clicking. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And the reaction from the internet's developer community was swift and merciless. For every brilliant developer a newspaper paid to build a digital cage, there were 1,000 brilliant hobbyists working for free to build a better lockpick, just for the fun of it. The user's counteroffensive was organized around browser extensions. A whole cottage industry of liberation tools popped up on the Chrome and Firefox extension stores. Simple, one-click tools with names like Enable Right-Click and Copy or Absolute Enable. These extensions were the digital equivalent of an anti-missile defense system. They were programmed to identify and surgically neutralize the publisher's hostile scripts before they could even load. Users would install the extension, and suddenly, the web worked again. The copy-paste function would be magically restored. The right-click menu would reappear. It was a constant cat-and-mouse game. A publisher would roll out a new script. A week later, the extensions would update, rendering it useless. Seeing their simple copy-paste blockers defeated, publishers invested in more complex and hostile scripts designed to break workarounds like inspect element and to hijack the user's clipboard. Effect, the tech community responded by developing and distributing sophisticated browser extensions and user scripts that were specifically designed to detect and disable these new measures automatically. Consequence, this ignited a futile and continuous arms race, where each side deployed escalating technical measures against the other, resulting in bloated, slower, and buggier websites for all users, with no decisive victory for either side. The meta commentary here is on the colossal waste of it all. This was a zero-sum game where the only byproduct was a worse internet for everyone. Publishers were spending actual money, paying developer salaries, to actively make their own products slower and more frustrating, all in a battle they were guaranteed to lose. Meanwhile, the users fighting back were the most engaged, most technically savvy readers, exactly the kind of audience a modern media company should be trying to attract, not fight. The entire conflict was a sideshow, a distraction. Because while they were busy fighting this trench warfare over a single paragraph, a much bigger threat was quietly looting the entire warehouse. The ultimate irony is that throughout this entire pointless escalation, the one workaround that truly mattered remained completely untouched: the screenshot. No amount of JavaScript trickery could ever stop a user from just taking a picture of their screen. The entire arms race was a complex, technical, and expensive theatrical performance that solved nothing. The publishers were building ever more complex locks for a door that had a giant, irreparable hole in it. And while they were obsessing over this little door, a new generation of content consumers, armed with aggregator apps and AI, were about to bypass the house entirely. The script wars raged on, a pointless, cyclical battle in the browser. Publishers deployed their digital barbed wire, and users deployed their digital wire cutters. It was a perfect stalemate, a quagmire of code that slowed everything down and solved nothing. And while this furious, microscopic battle was being fought on the front lines of every article page, a silent, tectonic shift was happening in the background. The publishers were so obsessed with the individual soldier trying to sneak across the border that they completely failed to notice the fleet of alien motherships descending from the sky, ready to vaporize the entire continent. The real threat wasn't the reader, it was the aggregator and the AI. First came the aggregators: Apple News, Google News, Flipboard. These were the sleek, friendly-faced diplomats of the new content world. They weren't fighting the publishers, they were partnering with them. They came to the media giants and said, "Your websites are slow, cluttered, and user-hostile. Give us your content directly. We'll present it in a beautiful, clean interface. And we'll give you a cut of the revenue and expose your brand to our millions of users." For many publishers, exhausted from their unwinnable war, this sounded like a pretty good deal. So they handed over the keys. They provided direct API access, clean RSS feeds, a fire hose of their content straight from the source. For the user, these apps were a paradise. Suddenly, articles from a dozen different paywall publications were all available in one place, with one consistent, lightning-fast interface. The paywalls, the copy-paste blockers, the hostile scripts, they all vanished, stripped away by the aggregator's clean room environment. The publishers, in a desperate bid for audience, had willingly given their content to a third party that provided a superior experience, thereby training users to bypass their own websites entirely. They hadn't solved their problem, they had just outsourced it, but the aggregators were just the opening act. The main event was the AI. While publishers were fighting over sentences, the burgeoning artificial intelligence industry was preparing to devour the entire library of human knowledge. The large language models that power modern AI are not born smart, they must be trained, and they are trained by being fed a colossal, planetary-scale diet of text and data. The training grounds? The entire public internet. AI companies deployed armies of sophisticated web crawlers, digital bots that swarmed across the web, downloading, indexing, and ingesting everything. Every news article, every investigative report, every archived column from the last 30 years. These AI bots were not like the Google Spider, which politely tries to render a page. These were industrial-grade data harvesters. They didn't care about the website's layout. They didn't care about the JavaScript. They often ingested the raw information from the server, completely bypassing the user-facing security theater. The publisher's entire arms race of scripts was like setting up a fancy laser grid in the lobby of a bank while a team of data thieves was in the basement, plugging directly into the mainframe and downloading all the money. As the digital ecosystem evolved, large-scale third-party platforms emerged with an insatiable appetite for content, operating on a scale far beyond that of an individual user. Effect: news aggregators struck deals to ingest content directly, while AI companies deployed massive scraping operations to download entire publisher archives as training data, both of which completely ignored the user-facing copy-paste blockers. Consequence: the publishers' street-level fight against individual readers was rendered strategically irrelevant, as their content was being consumed and repurposed on an industrial scale by tech giants, who were operating in a completely different dimension of the conflict. The meta-commentary is about the profound, tragic miscalculation of threat assessment. Publishers spent years and millions of dollars treating their own readers, their potential customers, as the enemy. They built broke, user-antagonizing systems to stop a student from quoting a paragraph for a school paper. During that exact same period, an AI model was learning from their entire 100-year archive for free, and then selling access to that synthesized knowledge as a commercial product. They were fighting mice while a dragon was carrying off their castle, brick by brick. The entire copy-paste war was a hysterical, paranoid distraction from the real, existential battle for the value of information that was happening right under their noses. The publishers were being outmaneuvered by nimble aggregators and devoured by monolithic AIs. Their strategy of fighting a trench war against their own readers was a catastrophic failure of vision. But how did they get here? Was this miserable, user-hostile landscape of paywalls and script wars the only possible outcome? For a brief, shining moment, the internet flirted with a different path. A third way, a seemingly logical, elegant solution that promised to solve the monetization crisis without all the animosity. It was called the micropayment, and it died almost the instant it was born. The concept was beautiful in its simplicity. Instead of the all-or-nothing ultimatum of a monthly subscription, what if you could just pay for what you used? A la carte, not a buffet. You see a headline that intrigues you. Instead of hitting a hard paywall, a small pop-up appears. Read this article for 25 cents. No commitment, no recurring charges, just a tiny, one-time transaction. It seemed like the perfect compromise. Publishers could finally monetize the 99% of casual readers who would never in a million years pay $15 a month for a full subscription. And users would get the freedom to roam the web, paying small amounts for the specific articles they valued. Without being shackled to a handful of publications, the dream was a digital wallet, a universal account that you could use to sprinkle digital dimes and quarters across the web, rewarding good journalism wherever you found it. It was fair, it was flexible, it was the utopian ideal of a true market for information. And in practice, it was a complete and utter disaster. Because the proponents of the micropayment dream made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that people, above all else, hate being annoyed. The problem wasn't the money, a quarter is nothing. The problem was the decision. The dream of a frictionless, pay-as-you-go internet died the first time someone had to stop mid-browse and make a conscious financial decision about whether a listicle about celebrity pets was worth 7 cents. This is the concept of mental transaction cost. The amount of brain power and willpower required to make a decision is often far more valuable than the tiny amount of money involved. A subscription is one big decision you make once a month. Micropayments are 1,000 tiny, irritating, soul-crushing decisions every single day. Is this breaking news worth 50 cents? Is this opinion piece worth a dime? What if I pay and the article is bad? It turned the joyous act of discovery into a constant, tedious cost-benefit analysis. Cause, as an alternative to the failing ad model and the high barrier of subscriptions. The idea of paying a small fee per article, a micropayment, was widely proposed as a fair middle ground. Effect, real-world experiments and user behavior analysis showed that the constant friction of making numerous small payment decisions created immense decision fatigue and a negative user experience, regardless of how low the price was. Consequence, the micropayment model failed to gain any traction and was abandoned, forcing the industry to double down on the simpler, all-or-nothing subscription model, which in turn locked them into the endless cycle of paywalls and user antagonism. The meta commentary is about the supreme reign of convenience in the digital age. The internet economy runs on the path of least resistance. The subscription model, for all its flaws, is incredibly simple for the user. You pay once, and the doors are open. The micropayment model, for all its theoretical fairness, was like having to feed a parking meter every 15 minutes. It was digital pocket change, a constant fumbling for coins in a world that was moving toward seamless, invisible transactions. People will pay a surprising amount of money to avoid a minor inconvenience. And there is no greater inconvenience than having your reading flow interrupted by a tiny toll booth before every single page. So the dream died. The startups that tried to build universal micropayment platforms fizzled out. The publishers, seeing the abysmal conversion rates, retreated back to the perceived safety of their subscription walls. They chose the blunt instrument over the surgical tool because it was easier. This failed experiment is a crucial part of the story because it helps explain the publishers' desperation. They felt like they had tried the friendly, reasonable alternative and it had failed. Backed into a corner, with ad revenue dead and micropayments doa, they concluded that the only path forward was the hardline approach: high walls, aggressive scripts, and a general contempt for the user who refused to commit. They had tried asking nicely. Now, they were going back to the bludgeon. So here we are, deep in the trenches of a pointless, never-ending war. The publishers have alienated their readers, broken their own websites, made themselves invisible to search engines, and created an accessibility nightmare. They've tried and failed with ads, and tried and failed with micropayments. Their last stand is the subscription paywall, defended by Imagine a line of hostile JavaScript. They have gone to extraordinary, self-destructive lengths to defend their content, which begs a very simple, very fundamental question that nobody seems to have stopped to ask. What, precisely, is the content they are protecting? Let's dissect the thing they are guarding like a state secret. The humble news article. A typical article is composed of two distinct parts. First, there are the facts, the raw data of reality. The who, what, when, and where. A CEO resigned. A building caught fire. A government passed a law. These facts are not a product. They are a commodity. In the hyper-connected digital age, a fact is the most slippery, unownable thing in the universe. The moment one journalist reports a fact, that fact is instantly public domain. It is tweeted, blogged, repeated, and re-reported by hundreds of other outlets within minutes. Trying to own a fact online is like trying to own the color blue. The second part of the article is the real product. It's the value add. It's the journalist's unique analysis, the exclusive quotes they spent weeks cultivating, the historical context, the narrative flair, the quality of the prose, the trust and authority of the publication's brand. It's the why and the how. This is the diamond. This is the thing worth paying for. The facts are just the sand the diamond is sitting in. The fatal flaw in the publisher's entire strategy is that they built a fortress designed to protect the sand and the diamond together, without ever distinguishing between the two. They were trying to claim copyright on the fact that it rained on Tuesday, while their real product, the beautiful, insightful essay about why the atmospheric pressure systems align to make it rain, was locked in the same cell. The user, more often than not, just wants to know if it rained, and they can get that information from 100 free sources. They can get it from a free local news site, from a wire service like the Associated Press, or from a quick Google search. The publisher's paywall, therefore, presents itself not as a reasonable price for a premium analysis, but as an absurd toll booth on the road to a public fact. Cause, the nature of the 24/7 news cycle instantly commoditizes the basic facts of any given story, making them freely available across a wide range of sources almost immediately. Effect, publishers' all-or-nothing paywalls make no distinction between these commoditized facts and their own unique, high-value analysis and reporting. Consequence, this strategy fundamentally misunderstands its own value proposition, attempting to hoard basic information that is already free, which in turn makes consumers less willing to pay, and devalues the truly unique journalism hidden behind the wall. The meta commentary here is on the colossal failure of the news industry to market itself correctly in the digital age. They fell into a defensive posture, trying to protect information in an era of information superabundance. They should have been confidently, aggressively selling what makes them unique, their expertise, their credibility, and their storytelling, instead of saying, the facts are free everywhere, but come to us for the truth, for the insight, for the story you can't get anywhere else. They said, pay us or you can't even know what happened. They chose to be gatekeepers of trivia instead of merchants of wisdom. This misunderstanding is at the very heart of why this is still a thing. They are guarding their paragraphs with the ferocity of a dragon guarding its hoard, without realizing that half the gold coins are chocolate wrapped in foil. The core information is already out there, spreading through the ecosystem in screenshots and tweets. The publishers are left desperately defending an empty castle, having fundamentally mistaken what their treasure was in the first place. And the internet, seeing this absurd, tragic spectacle, did what the internet always does. It started making fun of it. The publishers had misunderstood their product, misunderstood their audience, and misunderstood the basic physics of the internet. They had created a system so profoundly absurd, so perfectly calibrated for maximum user frustration, that it could only be met with the web's ultimate defense mechanism, mockery. When the internet encounters a system that is both hostile and stupid, it doesn't write angry letters to the editor. It doesn't organize a formal boycott. It turns the system into a meme. It laughs it out of existence. And so, the great memeification of locked content began. It wasn't a coordinated campaign. It was a spontaneous, cultural eruption. The shared, universal pain of hitting a paywall or being told you cannot copy text became a new language of online humor. Social media feeds filled with jokes that everyone instantly understood. There were the screenshots of the dreaded "you have one free article left" pop up, captioned with things like, "choosing my last meal on death row." There were the elaborate, multi-panel comics depicting a user in a trench coat and sunglasses, using 3 different VPNs and clearing their browser history just to read a recipe for lasagna. The very error messages the publishers had designed to be intimidating became punchlines. The phrase "content on this site may not be copied" would be slapped onto completely unrelated images: a cat refusing to be petted, a picture of a top-secret government document. It became a shorthand for any kind of arbitrary, unhelpful authority. The struggle was relatable, a tiny, low-stakes digital drama that millions of people acted out every single day. And in that shared experience, there was comedy. This wasn't just fun and games, it was a powerful form of cultural protest. A meme is the internet's version of a protest sign. It's a brutally efficient way to communicate a complex criticism. In this case, your business model is broken, and deeply annoying in a package that can spread to millions of people in a matter of hours. Each time someone retweeted a joke about fighting a paywall, it reinforced the collective public perception that these publications were the villains of the story. Cause: the frustrating and universally shared experience of encountering paywalls and copy-paste blockers provided fertile ground for relatable, humorous content on social media. Effect: users began creating and sharing a massive volume of memes, jokes, and skits that parodied the user-hostile tactics of news publishers. Consequence: this viral mockery turned the publisher's security measures into a public laughingstock, severely damaging their brand image and cementing a narrative where they were the out-of-touch antagonist in the story of the modern internet. The meta commentary here is on the absolute loss of control of brand experiences when it becomes a meme. For 100 years, these newspapers had meticulously controlled their public image. They were the gray ladies of journalism, the trusted voices of authority. Now, their defining feature in the minds of a new generation wasn't their Pulitzer Prizes. It was their annoying JavaScript. The most widely distributed piece of content from these prestigious news organizations was no longer their groundbreaking investigations, but a screenshot of their own error message with a SpongeBob reaction image slapped next to it. You cannot buy enough PR to fix that. The publishers were completely powerless to stop it. They could control every pixel on their own domain, but they had zero control over the culture of Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok. They were being defined by their worst, most user-hostile feature. The meme was a constant, public reminder that their system was a failure. It was a joke that everyone was in on except, apparently, them. This public shaming campaign, waged with jokes and reaction GIFs, created a toxic brand association that lingered, but the damage wasn't just to the corporate brand. The fallout from this strategy was starting to hit the very people whose work was supposedly being protected, the writers themselves. The memes were flying, the publisher's brand image was in a nosedive, a laughingstock in the very digital public square they once sought to dominate. But behind the corporate logos and the failing strategies, there are people, the writers, the journalists, the actual humans who sit down every day and turn blank pages into the content at the heart of this entire ridiculous war. And while the publishers were busy fighting their imaginary pirate army, they were inflicting friendly fire on their own troops, with the most vulnerable soldiers, the freelancers, taking the heaviest casualties. Let's talk about the life of a modern freelance journalist. It is a hustle. They are the gig workers of the information economy. They don't have a steady salary or a corner office. They have a laptop, a portfolio, and a constant, gnawing need to pitch the next story to the next editor. Their portfolio is everything. It is their resume, their business card, and their proof of life. It's a curated collection of links to their best, proudest work. This portfolio is the key that unlocks the door to the next assignment, the next paycheck. And the publishers, in their infinite wisdom, had just changed all the locks. This was the freelancer's portfolio nightmare. Imagine you've just spent 3 months on a grueling investigative feature. It gets published. You are incredibly proud. You send the link to a dream editor at a bigger, more prestigious publication. This is your shot. The editor clicks the link and is immediately greeted by a giant, unyielding paywall. Subscribe now to read. That editor is a busy person with 1,000 other submissions to read. Are they going to pull out their corporate card and buy a $15 monthly subscription just to read your one article? Absolutely not. They are going to close the tab and move on to the next writer in their inbox. Your link is dead. Your proudest accomplishment is invisible. The system that was supposedly erected to protect the value of journalism was actively destroying the career prospects of journalists. A writer's portfolio, once a proud collection of their best work, became a graveyard of links that led to a credit card form. The very platforms they wrote for were now holding their work hostage. The writer couldn't even effectively share their own articles on social media. They couldn't quote their own brilliant prose to entice followers. They were trapped, forced to promote a locked box containing their own labor. Cause the industry-wide adoption of aggressive, all-or-nothing paywalls meant that articles written by freelance contributors were locked away from the public, including the very industry professionals the freelancers needed to impress to get more work. Effect, freelance writers found that their online portfolios were rendered useless, as links to their best work led potential clients and editors to impassable subscription demands. Consequence, the publisher's strategy actively harmed the careers of their own most precarious contributors, trapping their professional achievements behind a corporate paywall and making it significantly harder for them to build a sustainable career. The meta commentary here is on the stunning, almost cruel, irony of the situation. The entire public-facing argument for paywalls was a noble one. We need to do this to support the writers and fund quality journalism. It was a rallying cry to save an industry, but the implementation of that idea revealed a deep disconnect. The system wasn't designed to support writers, it was designed to protect a corporate asset. The moment the writers needs to build a career, to have their work be seen conflicted with the corporation's need to secure a subscription, the writer was thrown under the bus. The content was everything. The creator was an afterthought. The publishers had created a system where they own the writer's past, and that ownership actively jeopardized the writer's future. The byline, the writer's name on the piece, was little more than a ghost haunting a machine that no one could access. This dysfunctional, creator-hostile environment stood in stark, comical contrast to the other media ecosystem that was exploding at the exact same time. The creator economy. The freelance writer, the very creator of the content, was left in the lurch, their portfolio held hostage by a system that claimed to support them. This entire dysfunctional saga, the paywalls, the scripts, the user hostility was unfolding in one corner of the web, but at the exact same time, in a parallel universe running on the very same servers and fiber optic cables, a completely different media ecosystem was exploding. It was a universe that ran on a diametrically opposite philosophy. This was the tale of the internets. On one side, you have the internet of legacy media. Think of this as a series of heavily fortified, privately owned digital panic rooms. The guiding principle is fear. Fear of theft, fear of devaluation, fear of losing control. The architecture is defensive. The walls are high, the doors are locked, and the windows are barred. Every visitor is treated as a potential threat. The user experience is deliberately filled with friction. Do not touch. Do not copy. Do not share, unless you do it in exactly the way we tell you to. It is a world built on a scarcity mindset. We have this valuable thing, and our business model depends on making it as difficult as possible for you to get it. On the other side, you have the internet of the creator economy. This is not a panic room. It is a sprawling, chaotic, open-air music festival. It's the world of YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, and Substack. The guiding principle here is not fear, it's infectious enthusiasm. The architecture is designed for maximum, frictionless movement. There are no walls. The entire goal is to make it as easy, as seamless, as humanly possible for you to share everything. The creator doesn't say, "Do not copy my content." They say, "Please, smash that like button, hit share, clip this moment, make a meme out of it, stitch this video, react to it." They are not protecting the content. They are desperately trying to make it spread like a benevolent virus. This is the fundamental, philosophical divide that defined the modern web. While a major newspaper was spending money to stop you from copying a sentence, a YouTuber with 10 million subscribers was actively begging you to clip, meme, and share their best moments. The user in the legacy media panic room is a consumer to be monetized and controlled. The user at the Creator Economy Festival is a fan or a community member to be cultivated and empowered. The two models could not be more different. Cause to competing media philosophies emerged on line. The legacy model, which tried to replicate the artificial scarcity of print by locking down content, and the native digital model of the creator economy, which embraced abundance and pursued growth through frictionless sharing. Effect, the creator economy's model, which aligns with the internet's Ural tendencies, proved to be exponentially more successful at building audiences, fostering community, and achieving cultural relevance. Consequence, legacy media's user-hostile approach made them appear increasingly out of touch and archaic, as users gravitated towards creators who treated them as partners in growth rather than as threats. To a business model, the meta commentary is that the news publishers fundamentally misdiagnosed their enemy. They thought their enemy was the user who refused to pay. They were wrong. Their real enemy was a better, more adaptive business model that was thriving right next door. They were trying to sell ice by building a fortress in the desert, while the creator economy was building a massive water park next door and inviting everyone in for free, confident they could make money selling concessions and merchandise later. One model tried to fight the nature of the internet. The other built a multi-billion-dollar industry by embracing it. The success of the creator economy was a living, breathing, screaming refutation of the publisher's entire strategy. It proved you could give your core product away, the video, the stream, the newsletter, and still build a wildly profitable media empire. Through a diverse mix of advertising, sponsorships, direct patronage, and merchandise, it proved that treating your audience with trust and respect was not just a nice idea, it was a devastatingly effective business strategy. The panic room was secure, yes, but it was also empty. The festival, meanwhile, was where the entire world wanted to be. The creator economy was booming, built on a foundation of trust and frictionless sharing. The legacy media model was a walled-off panic room that its own creators couldn't escape from. The contrast was stark, the failure obvious to any outside observer. So why did the publishers cling to their failing strategy for so long? How could they look at this user-hostile, brand-damaging, career-sabotaging mess and think, yes, more of this, please? The answer is simple and terrifying. They were high on their own supply. They were mainlining bad data. They had fallen victim to the great analytics lie they were telling themselves. In the modern corporate world, executives don't run a business on intuition. They run it on dashboards. They worship at the altar of metrics. They track things like time on page, scroll depth, and user interactions. These numbers are supposed to be the objective, impartial truth about how users are engaging with the content. And the beautiful, tragic, hilarious irony is that the publishers' user-hostile scripts were sending all of these metrics through the roof. Their broken website was telling them they were a smashing success. Let's step into the boardroom. An executive pulls up a chart. Look, he says, pointing at a line that's trending sharply upwards. Our average time on page is up 30% this quarter. Our new content strategy is working. Readers are more captivated than ever. The room applauds. They pop champagne now. Let's zoom out of that boardroom and into the messy reality of a user's desk. That captivated reader has been on the page for 5 minutes, not because the prose is so engrossing, but because they've been fighting with the website. They spend 1 minute reading, and for minutes trying to highlight a sentence, realizing it's blocked, opening developer tools, getting the page to crash, reloading, and then finally giving up and trying to print a PDF. That wasn't engagement. That was a wrestling match. The same delusion played out with every other metric. Scroll depth is at an all-time high. The executives would cheer. On the ground, the user was just angrily whipping their mouse wheel up and down because the page was so bloated with spy versus spy JavaScript that it had become unresponsive. User interactions have skyrocketed. They'd boast. Those interactions were not thoughtful comments. They were rage clicks, the repeated, furious hammering on a right-click menu that the website had disabled. Cause, the friction and bugs introduced by the anti-user scripts force people to spend significantly more time and perform more clicks on a page just to achieve a basic task or even to just wrestle with the broken interface. Effect, this user struggle was mechanically logged by analytics programs as positive signals of high engagement, longer visit durations, and more interactions. Consequence, executives presented with these deceptively positive metrics were fooled into believing their user-hostile strategy was actually increasing audience captivation, leading them to double down on the very tactics that were infuriating their readers. The Metacom. Terry here is a cautionary tale about the perils of data-driven delusion. Data is not wisdom. A chart can tell you what is happening, but it can never tell you why. Without context, without a human understanding of the user experience, metrics are just numbers in a vacuum, capable of telling you any story you want to believe. The publishers were so desperate for a sign that their painful strategy was working, that they chose to believe the most flattering interpretation of the data, even when it defied all common sense. They were celebrating the rising volume of smoke without ever once considering that it was coming from a fire in their own engine room. In boardrooms, they toasted their rising time on page, celebrating what they thought was rapt attention, when it was actually the average time it took a user to give up and hit CTRLP. This feedback loop of bad data justifying bad decisions is how the madness was sustained for so long. It created a corporate reality bubble, completely insulated from the actual, lived reality of their users. But bubbles, by their very nature, are fragile, and eventually, The grim reality of fleeing subscribers and a tarnished brand was about to become a force too powerful for any misleading chart to ignore. The surrender was coming. The boardroom was a bubble of self-congratulation, powered by misleading charts and the intoxicating fumes of bad data. But outside that bubble, reality was starting to bite back. The analytics light could explain away a lot, but it couldn't explain away everything. It couldn't explain the stubbornly flat subscription numbers. It couldn't explain the alarming churn rate of new subscribers who would sign up, experience the digital torture chamber of the website, and then cancel in disgust a month later. It couldn't explain the constant, torrential downpour of angry customer service emails. And it certainly couldn't explain why the company's brand was now a running joke on the internet. There was no single eureka moment. There was no dramatic scene where a brave analyst stood up and declared the emperor had no clothes. It was a slow, painful, grinding process of attrition. It was the gradual realization that the cost of the war was higher than any possible benefit. The developers, tired of fighting a pointless arms race, would point out that the scripts were being beaten anyway. The marketing team would present reports showing overwhelmingly negative brand sentiment. The accessibility team, if one even existed, would finally get a memo through about the potential for massive lawsuits. The evidence became a mountain, too big to be ignored, too solid to be explained away by a squiggly line on a graph. The bubble had to pop. The surrender, when it came, was not a bang. It was a whisper. There were no press releases, no triumphant blog posts titled "We're listening," a new, user-friendly approach. There was only a quiet, almost embarrassed, retreat. The war didn't end with a peace treaty. It ended with a quiet decommissioning of weapons in the dead of night, hoping no one would notice they had lost. One day, a user, conditioned by years of abuse, would visit a notoriously locked down news site. They'd find a quote they liked and, out of pure, masochistic habit, would try to highlight it, fully expecting the familiar, frustrating paralysis, and then it would just work. The text would highlight in that familiar, beautiful shade of blue. They'd hit Ctrl+C. They'd paste it, and the text would appear. It was a small, shocking moment of digital liberation. One by one, like embarrassed soldiers laying down their arms, some of the biggest offenders began to back down. A major tech news site would suddenly re-enable its right-click menu. A prestigious national newspaper would quietly remove the script that blocked text selection. It was a silent, uncoordinated, but undeniable trend. They were waving the white flag, but they were doing it behind their backs, hoping nobody was looking. Cause, the cumulative weight of negative brand perception, stagnant subscription growth, and internal recognition of the strategy's futility finally became impossible for executives to ignore, overpowering the misleading positive engagement metrics. Effect, a number of prominent news publishers, without any public announcement, began to quietly remove the most aggressive anti-copying and anti-right-click scripts from their websites. Consequence, this marked a de-escalation of the script wars and a tacit admission that the user-hostile approach had been a failure restoring basic functionality for users, but without any apology or acknowledgement from the companies who had subjected them to it for years. The meta commentary here is on the corporate inability to ever admit fault. This quiet surrender was the most telling part of the whole saga. It showed that they knew. They knew the strategy was a disaster. They knew it had infuriated their readers and damaged their brand. But their institutional pride, their corporate arrogance, was so immense that they could not bring themselves to say the simple words, "We were wrong." They just hoped that by stealthily fixing the problem, everyone would just forget the years of frustration they had intentionally inflicted. So the most intense, most absurdly aggressive phase of the war was over. The user, through a combination of technical ingenuity, stubbornness, and public mockery, had won. The simple, basic right to copy a sentence from a web page had been largely restored. But anyone who thought this was the end of the story was sadly mistaken. The publishers had abandoned their most hated weapon, yes. But the war for control of content was far from over. Defeating the annoying foot soldier of the copy-paste blocker only served to reveal the much larger, much more formidable monster that still stood guarding the gate. The petty tyranny of the copy-paste blocker was largely over. The user had won the battle. But winning a single battle doesn't mean you've won the war. The quiet surrender of the publishers was just a tactical retreat. They had abandoned their most irritatingly aggressive weapon, but the fortress that weapon was defending still stood, larger and more imposing than ever. Defeating the copy-paste monster, the annoying little gremlin that lived on the page, only served to give you a clearer view of the final boss, the paywall itself. And it wasn't just one paywall. It was a hydra. This is the grim reality of the modern web, the subscription model having beaten out all other contenders, now reigns supreme. But every publisher has their own subscription, every newspaper, every magazine, every niche tech journal. To be a well-informed person in the year 2025, you are expected to navigate a mythological beast. Want to read the New York Times? That's one head of the Hydra, demanding $17 a month. The Wall Street Journal? That's a second head, demanding $38 a month. The Washington Post? A third head. Your local city newspaper? A fourth. Add in the Atlantic for culture, ESPN for sports, a trade publication for your job. Before you know it, you are staring at a 10-headed monster, and every single head is demanding its own recurring tribute. This is the great plague of subscription fatigue. In a vacuum, any one of these subscriptions might seem like a reasonable purchase, but in aggregate, it's a nightmare. The dream of the digital newsstand where you could browse and buy any single magazine you wanted never came true. Instead, we got a world where you have to buy a lifetime membership to the entire bookstore just to read a single chapter. Nobody can afford this. Nobody wants to manage 10 different logins, 10 different passwords, and 10 different charges on their credit card statement. The cognitive and financial load is immense. The result is not a flourishing ecosystem of well-funded journalism. The result is the balkanization of information. The internet, the great democratizing force, has been carved up into a series of expensive, exclusive walled gardens. This creates a new kind of information inequality. The wealthy can afford to be fully informed, subscribing to a wide array of high-quality sources. Everyone else is forced to make a choice. You either pick one publication and live inside its ideological bubble, or you give up entirely and get your news from the chaotic, unreliable, and free-for-all world of social media feeds. The middle ground, the casually informed citizen who reads from multiple sources, is being priced out of existence. With the individual subscription model becoming the dominant strategy for nearly every publisher, the digital landscape became fragmented into hundreds of separate, paywalled services. Effect: the average user, faced with the overwhelming cost and complexity of maintaining numerous subscriptions, succumbs to subscription fatigue and refuses to pay for more than one or two services, if any at all. Consequence: this creates a deeply fractured and unequal information ecosystem, where high-quality journalism is accessible only to the affluent or the hyper-dedicated. While the majority of the population is locked out, the meta-commentary is that the subscription model, hailed as the savior of journalism, is only a savior for the very biggest players. It works for the handful of global brands that can position themselves as an essential, can't live without it utility for the mid-sized newspaper, the local investigative outlet, or the independent magazine. It is a death sentence. They are just one more head on a hydra that the average person has no desire to fight. The model doesn't solve the industry's funding crisis, it consolidates it, ensuring that only the strongest survive while the rest starve. So the war on the user has simply evolved. The open combat of the script wars has been replaced by the cold economic siege of the subscription hydra. The hostility is no longer in the code, it's in the price tag. The fundamental problem, the one that started this whole mess 15 years ago, remains completely unsolved. How do you fund high-quality journalism for a broad, democratic audience in the digital age? The industry's current answer seems to be, you don't, and so the absurd, unwinnable forever war rages on. And so we arrive at today. The year is 2025, and the war rages on. The front has shifted. The weapons have changed, but the core conflict remains exactly the same. We have journeyed from the utopian, dial-up dream of free information for all, through the fiery adpocalypse and the rise of the ad blocker rebellion. We watched in disbelief as publishers, panicked and desperate, erected the first clumsy paywalls, hiring digital bouncers for their once open libraries. We saw them escalate, deploying the insane, user-hating tactic of the copy-paste blocker, a move so hostile it turned millions of casual readers into sworn enemies. We cheered as the users fought back, first with the beautiful simplicity of print to PDF, then with the surgical precision of inspect elements. We saw the ultimate act of defiance in the unstoppable power of the screenshot, a low-tech weapon that no high-tech script could ever defeat. We watched as social media algorithms, in their infinite, immoral hunger for engagement, accidentally became the world's best distribution network for the very content that hated being distributed. We cringed as the publisher's strategy backfired on every conceivable level, making them invisible to Google, creating an accessibility nightmare, and actively sabotaging the careers of their own freelance writers. We saw their failure become a global meme. We saw them finally, quietly, begin to surrender. And where has this epic 15-year journey of technological warfare and strategic blundering left us. It has left us here, in the cold, unforgiving stalemate of the subscription hydra. The battles of the script wars are mostly over, but the economic siege has just begun. The fundamental relationship between the producers of high-quality information and the consumers of it is more broken, more adversarial, and more dysfunctional than ever before. This is the forever war, a conflict with no clear objectives, no achievable victory conditions, and no end in sight. The publishers cannot win. The nature of a digital file infinitely and perfectly reproducible at near zero cost makes their dream of perfect, print-era control an impossible fantasy. The users cannot win. The information they need to be informed citizens is increasingly locked away in a dozen different, expensive, walled-off gardens. The only real casualty in this entire pointless conflict has been common sense. Cause, the fundamental, unresolved clash between the internet's culture of open access and a legacy business model predicated on artificial scarcity, effect, over a decade of escalating, mutually destructive tactics between publishers and their own audience. Consequence, a permanent state of low-grade, unwinnable conflict that has resulted in a broken, balkanized, and deeply user-hostile digital information ecosystem. The meta-commentary is this: the entire saga is a tragic comedy of an old empire refusing to accept that the world has changed at every single turn. When faced with a choice between embracing the new reality or trying to recreate the old one, legacy media chose the past. They chose control over trust. They chose scarcity over abundance. They chose friction over community. They saw the internet not as a new kind of public square to be cultivated, but as an untamed wilderness to be conquered and fenced off. They spent a decade fighting a war against their own customers, only to find themselves irrelevant, mocked, and outmaneuvered by both nimble creators and monolithic tech giants. They fought so hard to protect the value of their content that they destroyed the value of their brand, and in the end, it's not clear if they've managed to save anything at all. And that is how we ended up in a world where news sites block you from copying a sentence, and then in the very same breath beg you to share their link. While the entire internet laughs at the absurdity of it all, it's a mess, it's a paradox, and for now, it is very much still a thing. And so, we're left with a digital news landscape where the price of admission is either a dozen different subscriptions or a degree in computer science to figure out the workarounds. Please, for the love of all that is holy, do not take any of this as financial, legal, or ethical advice. This was a highly dramatic, over-caffeinated sprint through a complex disaster, not a sustainable life plan. The fact that it was probably more coherent than the business strategies we just discussed should be terrifying to everyone involved. So what other modern, absurd phenomenon is currently driving you insane? What other product, service, or corporate strategy makes you want to flip over your overpriced standing desk? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. We're always looking for the next great digital mystery to oversimplify for your listening pleasure. And that's how that whole mess went down. Until next time, don't trust the algorithm.